sickly sweet smell clung to the cypress wood walls like a stain that no one could wash away. It was September 1893 when the first testimonies began to leak from Dauphine Street number 47 in the French Quarter, where the warped shutters guarded the most disturbing secret a mother could sustain for 4 decades. Write in the comments your city and the exact time you're watching this. What limits can maternal love cross when an entire neighborhood decides to look the other way? Bernadette Thibodeau was 32 years old when she gave birth to her last child in 1871. Her neighbors would later remember that she never asked for help during labor, never screamed, and that the only sound coming from her house on those nights was a constant murmur, as if she were singing a lullaby that lasted until dawn. The 3 sons grew up without setting foot in a school. Honoré, the eldest, showed a robust build at 25, but his gestures carried a childish shyness that unsettled those who saw him carrying sacks of flour each dawn. Silver, the middle one, had strangely smooth skin for his age, as if time had stopped on his face. And Casimir, the youngest, dragged his feet when walking and kept his eyes always downcast, like a child afraid of being scolded. The first sign that something didn't fit came with the 1876 census. Theodora Boudreau, the registration clerk, noted in her margins an observation she never dared report officially. The 3 brothers couldn't read, but their bodies were surprisingly well nourished for a family that didn't buy meat or milk at the French market. Aurelia Rousseau, who lived in the adjacent house, was the first to notice the pattern. Every afternoon, at 5 o'clock sharp, the same sound could be heard: heavy footsteps heading toward the interior of the house, followed by a deep silence that lasted exactly 2 hours. Afterward, the footsteps repeated, but in different order, as if it were a shift established for years. The sickly sweet smell intensified during those 2 hours. Aurelia described it as sour milk mixed with medicinal herbs, something that reminded her of the serum her grandmother prepared to heal infected wounds. But there was something more in that aroma, something that made her close the windows, even on the hottest days of the Louisiana summer. It was Crescencio Boudreau, the postman, who dared to ask directly. One October morning, while delivering a letter from the government, he peered through the half-open window and saw a scene that would mark him forever. Bernadette Thibodeau, already 50 years old, was sitting in a wooden chair with her torso uncovered, while Honoré, a 30-year-old man with a thick beard, had his head resting on her lap. Crescencio could never explain why he didn't scream or run away. He remained paralyzed, watching as the adult man moved his lips against his mother's breast with the desperation of a hungry newborn. The woman caressed his graying hair while murmuring words that sounded like an ancestral lullaby. The postman retreated in silence, but the echo of that image would pursue him for years. That same afternoon, he got drunk at Old Moro's Tavern and mumbled loose phrases that no one wanted to fully understand. "What that family does ain't natural," he repeated while downing his whiskey. "Sons can't keep being babies when they're already grown men." But Crescencio wasn't the only one who knew. Macrina Boudreau, the neighborhood midwife, had been called 3 times to the Thibodeau house during the 1870 seconds, not to attend births, but to check the mother's health. On each visit, Macrina found Bernadette with swollen breasts full of milk, despite it being more than a decade since she had given birth for the last time. "I have the gift of my grandmothers," Bernadette explained while covering herself with an embroidered blanket. "My body produces what my children need. It's a blessing not all women receive." Macrina applied herbal compresses and left without asking questions, but she kept in her memory the disturbing detail. The woman's nipples showed recent marks, as if they were used frequently. The midwife carried that secret like a stone in her stomach. In 1884, when Father Amadeus Rousseau arrived newly ordained to the parish, Macrina tried to confess, but the words stuck in her throat. "Father, there's a family that does things God doesn't approve of," she murmured from the confessional. The priest urged her to speak clearly, but Macrina could only add, "Nature has its laws, and they're violating them every day." Father Rousseau imposed a penance of 10 Hail Marys and filed the confession in his memory, but 3 weeks later decided to make a pastoral visit to Dauphine Street. He knocked on the Thibodeau door one Friday afternoon, precisely at 5, just when the ritual 2-hour silence began. Bernadette opened the door with disheveled hair and a poorly buttoned robe. Behind her, the priest could see an overturned chair and hear hurried footsteps heading toward the back of the house. The sickly, sweet smell hit his face like an invisible slap. "May I come in, Mrs. Thibodeau? I'd like to meet your family," asked the clergyman. The woman declined with a forced smile. "My sons are ill, Father. It's better if you return another day." But while she spoke, a wet stain spread across the fabric of her robe, at chest level. Father Rousseau noticed that her hands trembled and that she avoided looking him directly in the eyes. That night, the priest wrote in his personal diary, "There are families that live in mortal sin without knowing it, and others that know perfectly well the gravity of their acts, but choose to persist in them." The Thibodeau belonged to the second group. The first official document appeared in 1887, when Herminio Guidry, health inspector, conducted a nutritional census in the neighborhood. His report noted a statistical anomaly. The Thibodeau family didn't buy protein-rich foods, but the three sons showed muscle development levels above the regional average. Herminio requested a second inspection, but his immediate supervisor, Roland Boudreau, filed the petition without processing it. Years later, it would be known that Boudreau had received a nocturnal visit from Bernadette Thibodeau, who offered him special services in exchange for his silence. The official accepted, becoming the first man outside the family to taste the breast milk of a 50-year-old woman. The complicity network extended like an invisible spiderweb. Juventino Boudreau, who sold medicinal herbs at the French market, monthly prepared a special ointment for Bernadette, made with fenugreek, fennel, and wild goat extract. "It's to maintain production," the woman explained, while paying double the usual price. Juventino knew these herbs were traditionally used to stimulate lactation in new mothers, but never asked why a mature woman needed them so regularly. The neighborhood's silence wasn't coincidental. It was an unwritten pact, sustained by fear and morbid fascination. Each neighbor who knew the truth automatically became an accomplice, because denouncing the Thibodeau meant admitting they had allowed the aberration to continue for decades. In 1889, a minor incident almost broke the silent conspiracy. Ethelbert Boudreau, a 12-year-old boy, jumped the back fence of the Thibodeau house to retrieve his ball. What he saw in the courtyard changed his perception of reality forever. The three brothers were lined up against an adobe wall, completely naked from the waist up, with their hands behind their backs like soldiers awaiting orders. Their adult bodies contrasted grotesquely with their submissive and expectant posture. Bernadette walked in front of them, inspecting their faces, and occasionally stopped to touch their lips with her index finger, as if she were about to choose which of the three would be next. Ethelbert ran to his house without retrieving the ball, but that night he couldn't sleep. He told his mother, Clementine Boudreau, who immediately took him before Father Rousseau. The priest listened to the boy's testimony and decided the time had come to act. The following Sunday, during Mass, Father Rousseau delivered a sermon that everyone understood but no one wanted to openly acknowledge. He spoke of families that maintain pagan customs, of mothers who prolong their children's dependence beyond what's natural, and of communities that allow sin through cowardice. The church filled with tense silence. Bernadette Thibodeau was present, sitting in the last pew, dressed in black and with a veil covering her face. Her three sons didn't accompany her, which was unusual because they always attended Sunday Mass together. After the sermon, Father Rousseau announced he would conduct special pastoral visits to bless families that needed spiritual guidance. The threat was clear, but Bernadette rose from her seat, walked slowly toward the altar, and stopped in front of the priest. "Father," she said loudly so the entire congregation could hear her, "my family has been blessed by God with gifts others don't understand. If you come to my house, you'll be welcome, but you must be prepared to see miracles that defy human logic." The public challenge marked the beginning of the end. The woman had crossed the line between shameful secret and open vindication of her acts. As they left the church, parishioners looked at her with a mixture of horror and fascination, as if she were an exotic animal that had just escaped from its cage. That same afternoon, Gumersindo Boudreau, the town's mayor, convened an emergency meeting with municipal officials. Officially, the topic was sanitation problems in the French Quarter neighborhood, but everyone knew it was about deciding what to do with the Thibodeau family. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Present were the municipal president, the local police chief, the health center director, and 3 aldermen. In the end, they agreed to conduct a family welfare inspection the following Wednesday at 10 in the morning, when all the adult men would be at home. But someone leaked the information. Tuesday night, Bernadette Thibodeau personally visited each of the officials present at the meeting. It's unknown exactly what she offered them or what she said, but Wednesday morning, none of them appeared for the scheduled inspection. The only one who showed up was neighbor Boudreau, a policeman recently arrived from Baton Rouge who was unaware of the town's tacit agreements. He knocked on the door repeatedly, but no one answered. He decided to circle the house, and through a poorly closed window, he could observe the scene that would define the climax of the entire story. The three brothers were kneeling on the floor, forming a semicircle around their mother. Bernadette remained seated in a high chair, like an improvised throne, with her torso uncovered and her arms extended to the sides. Each son approached in turns, with slow and ritualized movements, as if they were participating in a perverted religious ceremony. Neighbor watched for 15 complete minutes, paralyzed by shock. The men didn't seem to be forced. Their faces showed an expression of childish tranquility, as if they had returned to a state of primordial innocence. Bernadette kept her eyes closed and murmured a lullaby while alternately caressing her sons' heads. The policeman left the place without making noise, but that same night he drafted a detailed report that he sent directly to the state capitol. However, the document disappeared before reaching its destination. Neighbor was transferred to another city a week later, officially due to service needs. Bernadette's strategy had worked for decades, but external pressure was becoming unsustainable. In 1890, an itinerant photographer named Evaristo Boudreau arrived in town, documenting Louisiana family traditions for a Capital magazine. Evaristo heard rumors about the Thibodeau family and decided to investigate on his own. He stayed at a nearby boarding house and for 3 weeks discreetly observed the house's movements. He managed to identify the shift pattern, exact schedules, and even the day of the week when Bernadette received her medicinal herb supply. The photographer bribed Aurelia Rousseau, the neighbor, to let him take photographs from her rooftop. The images he captured were disturbing. Adult men with developed bodies but childish attitudes, a mature woman maintaining routines typical of a nursing mother, and a family dynamic that defied all known social norms. Evaristo developed the photographs in his hotel room and prepared to return to the capital, but that night his room was ransacked. The images disappeared along with the negatives. The next day, the photographer was found unconscious in the Mississippi River that bordered the town, with a head wound and no memory of what had happened in the last 72 hours. The message was clear. The Thibodeau family had protection that extended beyond the town. But Evaristo had been cautious. Before developing the photographs in the hotel, he had mailed 3 negatives to a colleague in New York City, with specific instructions about what to do if he didn't return as planned. The photographs reached the capital in mid-1891 and were published in a social investigation magazine that specialized in extreme cases of the American family. The article, titled Perpetual Lactation, a case study in Louisiana, caused a stir in academic and journalistic circles. State authorities could no longer ignore the situation. In October 1891, a special commission was formed consisting of a psychologist, a social worker, a forensic doctor, and 2 public ministry agents. Their mission was to officially investigate allegations about anomalous family practices in New Orleans. The commission arrived in town on October 23rd, a rainy Wednesday that neighbors would remember as the day the silence ended. By then, Bernadette Thibodeau was 60 years old, but her body maintained the capacity to produce milk thanks to continuous use of natural hormonal stimulants. The officials presented themselves at the Dauphine Street house without prior notice. Bernadette opened the door dressed in a blue robe and maintaining a serene smile as if she had been waiting for them for years. "Come in, gentlemen. It was about time you came to know the truth." What they found inside exceeded their worst expectations. The house was divided into 3 main rooms, a room where the 3 brothers slept in individual beds, but with children's toys scattered on the floor, a kitchen where only gruels, baby food, and soft foods were prepared, and the central room, where the daily ritual took place. The central room had walls covered with childish drawings made by adult men. The strokes showed disproportionate human figures, gigantic women with enormous breasts, surrounded by tiny male figures. There were also words written in clumsy handwriting, mama, milk, love, repeated hundreds of times in different colors. In the center of the room was the throne chair where Bernadette fulfilled her maternal function. The seat had permanent stains of a whitish liquid, and the backrest showed nail marks as if it had been scratched during moments of extreme tension. On the sides, 3 cushions on the floor marked the positions where each son knelt to receive his nourishment. The forensic doctor, Dr. Eusebio Boudreau, performed a physical examination of Bernadette in the presence of the other officials. He confirmed that the woman maintained active breast milk production, estimated at approximately 1 liter daily, distributed in 6 feeding sessions that took place every 4 hours. Examinations of the 3 brothers revealed even more disturbing data. Despite their ages, Honoré was 40 years old, Silver 38, and Casimir 35. All maintained hormonal levels and emotional development equivalent to 14-year-old adolescents. Their bodies were physically developed, but their minds had been kept in a state of infantile dependence. The commission's psychologist, Dr. Rigoberto Boudreau, identified an extreme case of prolonged maternal dependence syndrome, a condition he himself had documented for the first time. The brothers not only depended on their mother for nourishment, but had developed a total inability to make independent decisions or establish relationships outside the family nucleus. During interrogations, the 3 men responded only when their mother gave them permission to speak. Their answers were monosyllables or very simple phrases, as if they were communicating in a language only they understood. When asked about their daily routine, they described the lactation sessions as mealtime and showed no signs of understanding that their behavior was unusual. The social worker, Mr. Prefecto Boudreau, attempted to separate the brothers from their mother during the evaluation process, but the reaction was immediate and violent. The 3 men began crying like babies, threw themselves on the floor in fetal position, and refused to answer questions until Bernadette was brought back to the room. The woman, for her part, maintained a defiant and proud attitude. She explained her behavior as an inherited family tradition and claimed her sons had been chosen by nature to receive perpetual maternal nutrition. She showed no signs of remorse, nor recognized anything morally questionable in her actions. "My grandmothers did the same," she repeated constantly. "In my family, mothers feed their children until they decide to stop needing it. My sons still need me, and I will continue fulfilling my maternal duty until the last day of my life." Subsequent investigations proved that Bernadette's grandmothers never existed, or at least never maintained similar practices. The woman had constructed a justificatory narrative to disguise what had actually begun as a psychological inability to accept that her children grow up and become independent. The case was presented before a family court in December 1891. The hearing was held behind closed doors, but details leaked to the regional press. For the first time in 40 years, the complete story of the Thibodeau family was publicly exposed, with all its most disturbing aspects. The judge, Mr. Laureano Boudreau, faced a case without legal precedents. There was no evidence of physical violence or explicit coercion. The brothers were technically adults and seemed to voluntarily participate in the family dynamic. However, their emotional development had been systematically sabotaged for decades. The sentence established mandatory family separation. Bernadette was admitted to a psychiatric hospital to receive treatment for obsessive-compulsive maternal disorder. The 3 brothers were transferred to a rehabilitation center where they would receive therapy to develop independent living skills. But the separation process proved more traumatic than expected. Bernadette developed severe depression and stopped eating. Her body, after 20 years of continuous milk production, entered a state of hormonal imbalance that affected her general health. She died in the psychiatric hospital 8 months after the sentence, officially from heart failure. Although doctors knew she had died of sadness, the brothers didn't adapt better to separation. Honoré, the eldest, attempted suicide 3 times during the first year of treatment. Silver developed a severe eating disorder and refused to ingest any liquid that wasn't warm cow's milk. Casimir, the youngest, lost the ability to speak and spent his days obsessively drawing the same image, a woman with enormous breasts surrounded by kneeling male figures. The town of New Orleans tried to forget the story, but the house on Dauphine Street became a kind of cursed place. No one wanted to buy or inhabit it. The adobe walls began to crack, the roof filled with leaks, and vegetation invaded the back courtyard. However, the sickly sweet smell persisted. Neighbors assured that, especially during rainy afternoons, that characteristic aroma that had marked the Thibodeau family for decades could still be perceived. Some said it was just humidity and mold, but others maintained that certain essences never completely disappear from places where overly intense stories were lived. In 1896, 5 years after the forced separation, the 3 Thibodeau brothers died within weeks of each other. Honoré was found in his cell at the rehabilitation center, apparently from natural causes, but with an expression of profound sadness that impacted those who found him. Silver died during a nervous breakdown, and Casimir simply stopped breathing one night, as if he had lost the will to continue living. The death certificates recorded different causes, but the therapists who treated them knew that all three had died of the same condition, the impossibility of existing without their mother. They had been deprived not only of their source of nourishment, but of their reason for being, their complete identity. The story of the Thibodeau family became a case study for psychologists and social workers throughout the country. Theses were written, conferences held, and protocols established to identify similar situations in other rural communities. But in New Orleans, people preferred not to talk about the subject. Collective memory had filed the case as an isolated aberration, something that had happened but had no relation to the town's normal life. However, on silent nights, when the wind blew from Dauphine Street, some neighbors still closed their windows to avoid the sickly sweet smell that seemed to filter from the abandoned house. The official case file was sealed in 1898, but unauthorized copies circulated for years in universities and research centers. Psychology students knew the story as the New Orleans case, or the perpetual lactation family, and it became a mandatory topic of debate in seminars on extreme family pathologies. Was Bernadette Thibodeau a sick woman who destroyed her children's lives, or a mother who took maternal love to its ultimate consequences? And what responsibility did the neighbors, authorities, and entire community that knew the truth but chose silence for 40 years bear? The final image that remains is that of an empty wooden chair in an abandoned room, with permanent stains that time couldn't erase. A chair that was thrown an altar, symbol of power and perversion, silent witness to a story that defies the limits of what a family can become when no one dares to intervene. What if in your own neighborhood there exists a family with similar secrets? What if you too knew something but preferred to look the other way? Write in the comments what you would do if you faced a situation like the Thibodeau. Truth always finds a way to come to light, but complicit silence can keep it hidden for decades.